Let's get back on context on what is happening in Venezuela as the National Bolivarian Militia enlistment day continues in the country that started yesterday and continues this Sunday. And to go over the details and the importance of what is happening, let's invite political scientist Eduardo Meneses to have his inputs on what is happening right now in Venezuela. Welcome, Eduardo, from the South.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
It's our pleasure as well. Eduardo, from a political point of view, what is your take on what is happening right now in Venezuela following the deployment of U.S. military Navy assets in the Caribbean and of the recent threats and the increase of the award, the money that is being put for the head of the president, Nicolas Maduro, which completely goes against any kind of international norm?
Well, I think that the first thing we need to acknowledge is that this is not an isolated thing that is going on. I mean, the United States have been implementing these kind of threats in their geopolitical strategy for years, for decades. And in the last months, we have seen exactly the same way of acting, for example, against Russia. We're trying to make any kind of pressures in the negotiation of the ceasefire that has been that has been in the middle of a lot of discussions in the last months. We have seen the same kind of things of deployment military near Russia. We have seen the exactly same kind of strategies deploying some military forces near China, also trying to increase the tension between China and the conflict that's going on historically with Taiwan. So this is not an isolated thing. What it is new is that we have been seeing for months now how there's a narrative that's being built around the drug cartels by Trump, saying that this is one of the main external threats to the U.S. is the same kind of narrative when they are building the external threats when they're speaking about Iran, for example. And what they are doing right now is, after months of building that strategy, now they are threatening to have an actual military intervention. Well, there are many things to say here. First, there is not an actual confirmation of how many military forces were deployed. This has been mainly communication, upside-up communication for the moment. We do not have clarity about how many actual military forces have been deployed, but mainly this is another way of deepening this threatens the diplomacy against all the progressive governments in Latin America. We have seen that with Maduro. We have seen the same kind of things with Brazil, which is other strategies, because not military deployment, but is economic war that is being held against Lula, supporting Bolsonaro. We have seen the same kind of approaches when it comes to Ecuador and asking Ecuador to put some military bases in its own territory. So we have seen this as a consistent strategy from the U.S. in the last years, and that has been increased clearly with the presidency of Donald Trump.
Do you think, Eduardo, that these actions follow the successful operations that security forces in Venezuela have achieved in dismantling terrorist plots and it fights that it has against drug trafficking, that they have proven to have a high success rate with the seizure and the destruction of many drugs and places where the drugs were being used for its transportation? Do you believe that maybe this was a way to put pressure on Venezuela to see if it could cement more division in the country, to try to instill fear in the population, but that has completely backfired, because now we're seeing over this weekend how people are going by the thousands from all sectors of Venezuela to express their willingness to protect the homeland and to express their condemnation to any kind of foreign interference?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can mention that there are two examples of how this strategy have failed in the past. And I mean, the people of Venezuela can clearly see this just looking backwards. The first example is what have been the results of all the interventions, the military interventions backed by the US in the Middle East. When we see countries like Libya, when we see countries like Syria, we know what is the result of these kind of interventions. And very recently, we have seen also a defeat of the US strategy in Iran. When there was all the attack by the Israeli occupation forces against Iran, and then the US intervened directly, bombing nuclear facilities, which is, by the way, totally prohibited by the international law. In fact, they did not achieve a victory, a military victory in Iran. Iran was the one who uh, backed. There was a retaliation, a defensive retaliation from Iran. They showed that it was not possible for the Iranian people to just accept what are all the conditions that the US are trying to impose to the Iranian people. And that was a success because they could not defeat the Iranian forces. In fact, it was all the contrary that happened. So, in a certain way, the people from all the global south, and in particular Venezuela, have been seeing all these historical processes. They know what it means for a country to open to a military intervention from the US. They know perfectly in the case of Venezuela, the only interest that the US have in Venezuela is the Venezuelan petroleum. There's no interest in democracy. There's no interest into fighting drug cartels. We have to say, by the way, that a lot of the drug cartels have been coordinated historically by undercover operations of the DEA, and we know that by many of the documentation that have been done during the last decades. And the people of Venezuela know that they cannot open uh, their country to an intervention of the US. And by the way, the triumph, the military triumph of Iran also showed that a country which is uh, ready to defend themselves with thousands of people, as you mentioned just right now, that have been mobilized. There have been a mobilization for the defense of the country. Is not easy, even for the United States or any other imperial forces, to defeat this kind of position. That's why we are seeing this mobilization right now as well.
Eduardo, and from a regional and international point of view, how important it is the support and for the Venezuelan government and its people and the condemnation to these U.S. actions. We saw many countries condemn the movement of the U.S. and we also saw regional blocs like ALBA-TCP condemn these movements and the commitment that they have expressed to continue to preserve the area, Latin America and the Caribbean, as a zone of peace. So what is the importance of all these international actors in these kind of events?
Well, we need to highlight one thing is that we are in a historical moment that we could say that started with the war in Ukraine, where definitely the loss of hegemonic forces of the United States and the European allies of the United States have been translated into a military strategy to try to maintain these hegemonic forces. Uh, it started with Ukraine and Russia, but then the genocide in Palestine has reached a new level of this strategy. Why? Because all that has been happening for more than almost 2 years in Palestine showed how the United States and the allies of the United States, the European countries and some other global north countries are totally ready to destroy any part of the international law institutions, international law principles in order to maintain their global power. So right now, when we see the exact same strategy starting to show in Latin America, it's obvious that all the countries that do not want to have an escalation of war, do not want to have an escalation of imperial aggressions in mainly the global south countries when they are seeking resources, uh, they are in a same voices uniting together to condemn all this strategy, the strategy of threatening Venezuela, threatening Maduro, threatening any government by this kind of means, which are totally in the violation of international law. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now with ALBA-TCP, with CELAC, that also proclaimed Latin America as a peace zone. And we are seeing that even countries that are not totally politically aligned with necessarily Venezuela or some other countries, they understand that it's in the common interest to maintain a strategy of peace where diplomacy is the main tool to resolve any kind of geopolitical conflict. And it's not war, because war is only going to continue perpetuating all the imperialist aggressions that we have seen in the last decades.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for your